In 100 years, what things will seem barbaric that are normal to us today? I wonder if somebody 100 years ago would have answered lobotomy. The guy who discovered it was awarded with a Nobel Prize. They interviewed his son and he was like, yeah, Dad just used the OL ice pick out of the junk drawer. Sorta kinda similar to a lot of discoveries. We, honestly, are not as brilliant as our egos would have us believe. Medical procedures. In 100 years, the way they are treating things today will be like us looking back to when bleeding someone was a valid treatment option. Bleeding is still an in-use treatment for some things, as I found out after being diagnosed with high hemoglobin. Polycythemia vera. Although it's just barely out of the normal range as of the last couple of years. Doctors haven't been able to figure it out yet, but it's not at a concerning level. That's exactly what came to mind, particularly cancer treatments like chemotherapy. When you consider the improvements we've made in the last 100 years, the next 100 should yield some amazing improvements. Only downside is nobody will be able to afford it. Yeah, it was wild. You had to use just enough radiation to kill the bad cells, but not too much to kill the good cells. In 100 years, radiation treatment will be viewed like the iron lung and cancer like polio. This is completely valid, but reminds me of all the scenes in Star Trek that had the doctor going on and on and on about how horrible the medical procedures were back in the 20th century, LOL. Even in Star Trek Enterprise, there was an episode where the lady had lung cancer and Dr. Phlox was that's easily treatable. What makes you think that planned obsolescence will no longer be a thing in 100 years? As far as we know, this ultra-capitalistic system may be even more hardcore in the future. Yeah, whenever I hear someone mention late-stage capitalism, I think, what makes you think we're there? Whenever there's any effort to alter capitalism in its current form, the powers that be throw everything they've got at squashing any and all momentum. We're in mid-stage capitalism at best. Late-stage capitalism in the sense that maybe anyone not dead from the sky getting angry with us is going to be in a Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome hellscape in 50 to 100 years. Not late stage on the way to something better, I think. I was talking with a patient who hadn't had a uterus ultrasound in 20 years. I was going through the consent form, and she told me when I had a baby they didn't ask for permission, they just shoved it in. I'm getting an IU'd in. I'm having it under general anesthesia because fuck doing that shit conscious. I have to sit on a waiting list for a year, but so worth it. I had a doctor try to push them before finally giving into some more permanent birth control options. Absolutely no effing way I was getting that done. I was having a conversation with an MD friend while I was having to go through biopsies. One thing that came up was if men were the ones to have to deal with that. Something would have been figured out a lot sooner to reduce pain and discomfort. But for us, just a poke and some discomfort, it'll be over soon enough, just deal with it. It does work, but hopefully in 100 years we'll have something less brutal that will render it obsolete. We won't look back on it as a mistake, but as a necessary evil. My grandfather got prostate cancer in his 80s. The doctor explained all his options, and he asked his doctor to pick what he would choose for himself at that age. I forget the details, but it was like tiny radiation rods implanted directly where they needed to be to kill the cancer. Cured him with hardly any side effects. Really cool stuff. We already have vaccines to prevent several types of cancer. Hopefully we have many more to come. True, but the mechanism of action will definitely be considered barbaric in the future when better options are available. Essentially, cells in the process of dividing will die with less radiation exposure than cells that are not dividing. And cancer cells are always dividing, so they die faster than non-cancerous tissue. Targeted radiation for solid tumors does cut back on excess exposure, but I'd like to think that in 100 years humanity will be doing much better than that. We're already seeing treatment shifting towards immune-based therapy. Give it another 20 years and chemosurgery radiation will hopefully seem old-fashioned. We're rapidly getting better treatments. My brother is an engineer on a machine that takes your blood out, codes your white blood cells to attack cancerous cells, and pumps it straight back into the body. It's apparently already in a lot of cancer treatment centers. The concept has existed for a long time, but was previously cost and time prohibitive, as it would require an MD to sit there for hours to do the procedure by hand and not mess up enough to seriously harm the patient. The machines automates virtually everything and makes the treatment affordable. Don't know how this is so low. If we're around long enough and play our cards right to get to that point on the philosophical moral development tree, it will certainly be by far the best answer to this question. Depending on how fast it happens, it could be an incredible rift between generations. But I also think it's entirely possible that we never get there. Absent some existential threat taking us out likely eventually, and possible soon, I think humanity would eventually manage to overcome the blight of in-species oppression. Even if it takes us far, far too long, and it could be a while, we will fail for a while, go backwards at times. It might not be in this iteration of civilization, but the technological and communication gaps between humans and non-human species are so large that I think humans could conceivably maintain our control over and infliction of suffering on other species indefinitely. Doesn't mean we will just that if we choose to do something else. I think it will take an unprecedented process to realize it. We seem to be on the cusp of meaningful advances, e.g., Wegovy, Ozempic in treating obesity as a disease, and 100 years seems to be a long enough runway for medication to be the primary way to prevent and treat obesity for the general population. By contrast, shoving a metal tube violently into an unconscious patient and vacuuming out liters of fat will seem almost medieval and pointless. Forcing terminal people who are only going to experience agony until death to live until they die naturally. 100% this is going to be deemed barbaric, and it will change. It's almost entirely due to religion. People who have been fortunate enough to not be around this won't understand usually until they are around it. Most people just simply ignore death and do not care until it is too late. It's like the least adult thing we do. Thankfully, various countries and states around the world have made voluntary euthanasia legal. I live in NSW, Australia, where it was legalized last year, and it gives me peace knowing I won't have to potentially die screaming if I don't want it. Hopefully, the whole criminal justice system as it exists now in many countries, including the US. The idea of not spending money to help desperate people, but then waiting till desperate people do something wrong and spending $50,000 a year to lock them up with other criminals is absurd. We pour so much money and effort into punishing crimes, despite overwhelming evidence that it is not effective at preventing future crimes. And even what we consider crimes is barbaric. Take some LSD in the privacy of your own home and affecting no one. Enjoy potential jail. Get addicted to legal opioids pushed by a pharmaceutical industry that made billions and now rely on illegal ones. Enjoy potential jail. But run a company that gets the country addicted to opioids through lies? Keep most of the profit, pay a modest fine, pinky promise to not do it again. Mug a guy on the street for $50? Enjoy jail. Steal hundreds of thousands in wages from hundreds of employees? Pay it back if you can and promise not to do it again. Probably much of our social views, even ones you see as good, though this maybe be more 150 to 200 years in the future. Hopefully our complete disregard for our privacy and individual rights. But who knows, since trends are pushing society towards less privacy and more groupthink. Burning petroleum as fuel. It's crazy if you think about it. There are lots of super important everyday things, from polymer to solvents to medicines and even roads, that are impossible to create without petroleum, and there are zero alternatives. And here we are, burning it just to make some heat, as if it were infinite. In 100 years, our children will think about it the same way we think about people before us that ate the dodo into extinction. Oh God, I'm going to get absolutely downvoted to hell for this, but I genuinely think that there are certain characteristics of humans that are misdiagnosed when they really should be treated as a mental issue, and we're not doing our fellow humans any good by buying into the delusion. Sorry, not sorry. Allowing people to simply starve to death and be homeless in the name of both corporate profits and easing tax burdens for people who already have millions, billions. Not letting women control what happens to their own bodies. Looking away or blaming the victims for it whenever transgender people are murdered. Giving cops military-grade weapons when all they do is terrorize anyone who isn't white. Jobs. Being forced to labor to make someone else rich in order to not starve is barbaric when we can easily replace most of the production of the basic necessities of life with a system that is publicly owned and done at cost. That's not to say people won't have money and buy and sell things, but holding basic survival over people's heads in order to get them to accept having the majority of their labor taken by the people who own stuff will be considered slavery with extra steps. Not 100, but one day people will probably think of eating actual animals instead of lab-grown meat as barbaric. I'm not a vegan or anything, but I could see attitudes changing once synthetic gets cheaper than natural. Most cancer treatments, I assume. A lot of them boil down to radical surgery, followed by aggressive chemical and radiation therapy. It's bad enough that it's common to hear about people with low odds choosing to accept death rather than spend their final years undergoing treatment. I have always thought it would be interesting to take something we would think is bizarre and wrong as interracial marriage in the 1800s or gay relationships in the early 1900s and write sci-fi where they feel the same way. Where we are the historical society with obviously evil values. The problem with such a thing is by nature we would find any such thing deeply offensive, and it would not jibe with what our notions of progress is because it would be so evil and wrong to us. I thought it might be interesting to take it backwards. Have the future society have a value we would find absurd today, though? Because there is absolutely no doubt that is how basically every civilization prior to 1900 would have viewed us as these strange immoral aliens that have absolutely no sense of right and wrong. Excessive cyberbullying. The way millions of people can just anonymously hoard around a lone non-anonymous individual and just bully them extremely viciously for years if not eternity for something stupid, like doing something cringe, is insane. Marketing. AR, the forced application of tools borrowed from clinical psychology to manipulate, subvert the will of people. 100 years from now, we'll look back on certain marketing practices in use today as a sort of appalling psychological rape, similar to how we look back at snake oil salesmen. I'm hoping we see a fight to enshrine our right to an ad-free world in the next decade, i.e., it should be illegal to force users to deactivate ad block, and legal for AR devices apps to allow for a global removal of ads from your perceptual field. Why do I think this? AI and quantum computing. Marketing is already an oily and perverse industry. Just wait until the capitalists have a 10th gen model of your psychological profile on hand and run 20 billion ad scenarios for every single ad you see. They won't stop until they've gone too far. Don't believe me? Check out the book 80/20 Sales and Marketing. It'll introduce you to split testing and how to run ads that could sell water to a fish. This sort of thing is literally what's made Google one of the wealthiest organizations in history. Scale these methods up with AI quantum, and you've arguably just created the nuclear warhead of mind control. Will we collectively realize this before it's too late? Probably not on an intellectual level, but we're all already creeped out by ads that are being delivered to us through personal data collection. You know the sensation I'm talking about. I think at some point it gets so insane that we'll end up with scenarios like vegans lining up at Texas Roadhouse for a rare sirloin. I'm hoping we hit a sort of knee-jerk "this is fucked up" moment soon. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next one.